I walked into my father's house after 7 years, and the air tightened like a belt. Diane's smile didn't reach her eyes, and my father's jaw settled into that old line he wore when something veered off script. A server brushed past with a silver tray that caught every chandelier in the room, and for a second, the reflection looked like rain. Mason stood near the scale model in the foyer, polished steel tiny towers. A little flag at the corner, listening to men in dark suits call him the future. Someone said my name under their breath as if it might stain the white marble. Diane pressed a chilled tray into my hands and told me to be useful. I held it steady and let the room misread me, because the paper in my clutch could turn the lights out on that little model in a single sentence. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to walk back into a room that once decided who you were. My name is Harper Lane, and I didn't grow up in rooms like this, even though my father built them. My earliest memories are of a small Cape Cod, on a quiet street, a mother who ironed my school shirts on Sunday nights, and a kitchen where kindness was the measure of success, not square footage. When Mom passed, the world shifted to the big house on the hill, and the expectations that came with it, pressed uniforms, perfect report cards, and a family motto that sounded like love, but read like a contract deliver and you belong. I was a scholarship kid at heart, who learned to say sir and ma'am to people who preferred their titles spoken out loud, even at the breakfast table. Yet the parts of me that mattered most were quieter. A steady hand for puzzles, a habit of finishing what I started, a stubborn belief that integrity doesn't need a spotlight. Those old values stayed with me as I moved from public schools to private halls, from a secondhand laptop to a university lab, where code felt like music and patterns told stories, and even then, I knew the life my father drew for me. Boardrooms, brand deals, a corner office with my last name on the glass was not the only way to be of use. Lane Dynamics was all glass, and edges a monument to deals and deadlines, and the nearer I drew to it in college, the more the distances showed. People in those rooms talked about outcomes in billions, while the teams I admired talked about outcomes in lives. I interned where I was expected to wear the suits I was given, and smiled in photographs that would someday be framed along the hallway, yet every night I found myself pulled back to the work that didn't need applause detection models, that learned faster than attackers, simple lines of code that closed quiet doors, the kind of solutions that never make headlines because nothing terrible happens. When the federal recruiter asked for 10 minutes after a campus presentation, I said yes and kept saying yes through interviews and background checks until there was a letter on my desk with a seal that meant service. It wasn't glamour, but it was purpose. And I heard my mother's voice in the way the words sat on the page, do the right thing and do it well. I told my father in the study with the heavy curtains and the family crest over the fireplace. He listened like a judge, not a dad, and when he finally spoke, he said there was no room in his house for anyone who chose shadows over legacy. Leaving wasn't dramatic, but it was permanent. A box of books, a duffel of clothes, a bed and a walk-up over a dry cleaner where the steam rattled the pipes every evening at 6. The work started small night rotations, flagged alerts, review queues that never emptied, and grew into missions where the stakes were measured in systems we depend on, without thinking where a quiet fix meant an uninterrupted morning for millions of strangers. I learned to drink bad coffee at 2 a.m., to trust teams that didn't trade names, and to find an odd comfort in the hum of a server room where the lights never go out. The apartments improved slowly, but the measure of my days didn't change. Build the safeguard, verify it, then build it again. Say less, do more. Keep the door locked, not because you fear the world, but because you care who gets inside. It wasn't the life framed along my father's hallway yet. It was a life with a clear line down the center serve, without spectacle, and count success in the problems people never knew could have been theirs. So when the Sentinel interface, my father's company's proudest project, landed on the national docket with a partnership from Apex Defense, my assignment was as inevitable as it was complicated. I requested to be kept at arm's length and was asked instead to step closer to test what others only described, to see how the thing held under stress and whether its promises matched its polish. I knew what stepping closer would mean, the big entryway, the eyes that prefer a story. They can repeat the way Diane would touch my elbow and guide me toward the work no one else wanted to see me carrying. Still standing under that chandelier with the tray cooling my palms, the math was simple and the choice was already made. A good system either holds or it doesn't, and the people who built it deserve to know which. I lifted the glasses as if I belonged where they put me, let the conversations pass over my shoulder like weather, and watched the model in the center of the room glow beneath the lights, beautiful and useless, until it proved itself in the storm it was built to face. The string quartet shifted keys. A door opened near the back, and the crowd changed posture, the way fields lean when wind moves through. I didn't turn right away, because there are moments when it's better to feel a room before you face it. Somewhere behind the voices, a name I recognized rolled low and certain, and even the men who never stopped talking began to listen. Someone important had stepped in, someone who didn't need to be told who was holding the tray, or why the smallest detail in a room like this can end up being the whole story. I set 2 flutes on the nearest table and let my hands go still, the letter in my clutch as quiet as a held breath, and waited for the first sound that would tell me how the night was going to break. The moment the tall man entered the room, conversation shifted like someone had cut the music mid-note. Gregory Stone didn't need an introduction. His presence did the work for him. My father moved quickly to greet him, voice rising with that mix of charm and calculation he reserved for people who could change his fortune. He placed a hand on Mason's shoulder and said the words I'd heard my whole life, the ones that used to define me. This is the future of Lane Dynamics. Gregory's handshake was firm, polite, but his eyes had already moved past Mason. They landed on me still holding the tray Diane had handed me, surrounded by guests who now pretended not to stare. His expression softened with recognition. He crossed the room without hesitation. "Agent Lane," he said, his tone steady but carrying weight. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight." Diane froze. The stem of her glass tilted slightly and my father blinked as if he'd misheard. "Agent—" The word hung between them like smoke. Gregory reached out his hand, not for the tray, but for mine. "I've followed your work since Geneva," he said. "That adaptive honeypot model was ahead of its time." For a moment, I almost forgot where we were. The chandeliers, the whispers, the gleam of the model in the center of the room, all of it fell away. I smiled, just enough to keep the air steady. "Appreciate that, sir," I said. "I thought I'd make an unannounced appearance before tomorrow's audit." His quiet laugh was the only sound in a room that had gone completely still. My father's color drained. "Audit," he managed. Gregory turned slightly. "Yes, Thomas. The Sentinel Partnership falls under federal security oversight. Agent Lane here is leading that review." The tray felt lighter in my hands as I set it down on the nearest table. "Technically," I said, "I'm the one deciding whether your project moves forward." The silence that followed could have cracked marble. I met my father's eyes for the first time that evening. He looked at me like the language had changed, and he didn't know the words anymore. "You're with them?" he asked. "I am," I said. "But tonight, I'm just here to observe." I gave the tray to a passing server and stepped forward steady under the chandelier. The room's attention followed like a current, every face turning toward me, waiting for whatever came next. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The title had already done the speaking. The rest of the night passed in muted glances and murmurs that followed me like shadows. The men who had smirked when Diane ordered me to serve drinks now cleared a path when I walked by. The women who whispered about my wasted potential stared at their glasses instead. My father avoided my eyes. Mason disappeared entirely. By the time I slipped away to the far side of the room, the music had softened to a low hum. I stood near the fireplace and let the sound of strings blur into the quiet. It should have felt like triumph. For years I'd imagined what it might look like for them to see me, not as the mistake who walked away, but as the professional I became. Yet standing there, I felt only the old ache. The memory of the night everything broke still lived in me as fresh as the day it happened. I was 23 when the letter came. Fresh out of Penn, top of my class in applied mathematics. 3 internships lined up, 2 MBA offers, and a seat waiting for me at my father's company. Everyone around me treated it like the next chapter of a book already written. Then the recruiter approached me at a cybersecurity conference. 10 quiet minutes and everything shifted. The federal agency had read my research on breach detection, and they wanted me. When I told my father, he didn't speak right away. He poured a drink, looked out the window, and finally said, "You're making an expensive mistake." I tried to explain that I wanted my own path, that public service wasn't a downgrade, it was a calling. He only shook his head. "You're throwing away everything I built for you." Diane stood in the doorway, arms crossed, ready to deliver her lines. "She's just doing this for attention, Thomas. If we hadn't spoiled Mason, she wouldn't need to prove she's special." Their voices blended into a rhythm I knew too well, my choices reduced to rebellion, my ambition mistaken for betrayal. The argument stretched through the night. My father's voice grew colder with every sentence. "You want to work for people who hide in basements? Go ahead, but you won't do it under my roof." When I asked if he was serious, he turned his back and said, "If you walk out that door, Harper, you're no longer part of this family." By morning, my bags were packed. The locks were changed before I reached the end of the driveway. Mason passed me on his way to the gym and muttered, "Guess not everyone's built for real success." I remember the heat of the sun on the hood of my car, the sound of gravel under the tires as I drove away. The first year was harder than I admitted to anyone. I rented a one-bedroom above a laundromat, where the smell of detergent seeped through the floorboards and the radiator clanked through the night. My first assignments were menial review logs, scrub metadata, long hours that blurred one day into the next. Still, there was something honest about it. No one cared about my last name. No one expected me to be a reflection of anyone else. I learned to measure progress by silence, the days when nothing crashed, no one panicked, and systems kept running. I learned that pride didn't need applause. The discipline of that life became its own kind of peace. I stopped checking the family's press releases. I stopped sending birthday cards that came back unopened. The distance became routine, like a scar that stops hurting but never fades. Standing by the fire that night, surrounded by people who hadn't thought of me in years, the weight of all that history settled quietly in my chest. Across the room, Mason was still playing the part, shaking hands, smiling for investors, a perfect reflection of our father. It might have worked if I hadn't already seen the reports. The Sentinel interface wasn't ready, the code was rushed, and tomorrow I would see just how deep the damage went. "Agent Lane," a voice said softly. I turned. One of the junior engineers from Apex stood there nervous, his tie slightly off-center. "I just wanted to say, your paper on adaptive monitoring changed the way we approach our network maps. It made a real difference." I nodded, grateful but unsure what to do with the words. "Thank you," I said quietly. He smiled, almost relieved, and disappeared back into the crowd. Then Mason appeared, holding a half-empty glass, his tie undone. "So he said, 'You're the one holding our future in your hands.'" I didn't respond. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Funny. You wanted so badly to leave this family, and now you get to destroy it from the inside." "There's a difference between destruction and accountability," I said. His laugh was sharp. "You've always had something to prove." "No," I answered. "I just stopped proving it to the wrong people." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw it, the flicker of uncertainty, the edge of fear, that maybe he wasn't as ready as he pretended to be. I leaned closer, my voice even. "Starting tomorrow, I'll audit every line of code you approved. This isn't about Family Mason. It's about national security. If I find one intentional flaw, you'll be lucky to keep your name on the door." He tried to speak but couldn't find the words. When I turned away, the music had started again, and the guests were beginning to leave. My father stood near the staircase, still frozen in disbelief, Diane whispering something I couldn't hear. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. That night, as I walked into the cold air outside the Carter estate, I understood that tomorrow would not be about revenge or pride. It would be about truth. For the first time in years, the weight of the name I carried didn't matter. What mattered was what I did with it. And in less than 12 hours, I would walk into the company my father built and find out whether the empire that had exiled me was strong enough to survive the light. The next morning came early. The city was still gray when I left my apartment, the streets half awake and quiet. A federal sedan waited at the curb engine, running the kind of unmarked car that draws no attention but never quite disappears. The driver nodded as I stepped in. We didn't speak for most of the ride. By the time we reached the glass towers of Lane Dynamics, the sun was breaking through a line of low clouds, painting the building in pale gold. Inside, the air smelled of new carpet and recycled ambition. The receptionist looked up from her desk, recognition flickering behind her professional smile. "Good morning, Agent Lane," she said softly. I asked for access to the systems floor. She hesitated, then reached for her phone, probably to warn someone upstairs. I didn't stop her. Word would travel fast anyway. The elevator ride felt longer than it was. Floor numbers blinked upward in silence until the doors opened to a wide corridor lined with tempered glass and brushed steel. Beyond it, I could see the server control center, the core of the Sentinel project. A young engineer stepped forward, badge clipped crooked to his collar. "You must be Agent Lane," he said, clearing his throat. "I'm Milo Hart. Mr. Mason told me to help you with whatever you need." He looked nervous, so I nodded to set the tone. "Let's start with a full walkthrough," I said. "System segmentation, containment layers, and red zone shielding. Show me everything, including what's not on the presentation deck." Milo led me through rows of humming equipment and screens filled with cascading code. He spoke quickly at first, pointing out nodes and firewalls, but his pace slowed when my questions came. I asked about redirect sequences and traffic throttling. He hesitated. "Some of those were pre-approved at the executive level," he said finally. "Deployment was accelerated to meet the partnership timeline." Accelerated was the polite word for cutting corners. I kept my expression neutral. "Who signed off on that?" He shifted his weight. "Mostly Mason." The directive came down from him. I wrote his answer in my notebook without comment. "Send me the commit logs for the last 4 weeks," I said. "I also need sandbox reports and endpoint activity." Milo nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." As he gathered files, I studied the monitors. The system was sleek, well-funded, and deeply flawed. Unsecured API routes, outdated inspection filters, and a few timestamps that didn't match their logs. Each issue might have been harmless on its own. Together they formed a pattern, a door left unlocked in a house that claimed to be secure. At 10 past 10, the door opened behind me. I didn't turn. I recognized Mason's voice before he spoke. "You've made yourself comfortable," he said, trying to sound casual. "I'm doing my job," I replied. "You'd know the process if you'd read the compliance terms." He stepped closer, his tone dropping. "You're not really going to tank this contract over a few bugs, are you?" I turned then. "These aren't bugs, Mason. They're vulnerabilities. You launched this system before it was ready." He smiled the way our father used to when closing a deal, controlled, confident, slightly desperate. "I made aggressive calls. That's how innovation works." "No," I said evenly. "That's how mistakes become national headlines." For a moment he said nothing, just watched me typing. "So that's it?" he asked. "You'll bury us because you finally can." "I'm not here to bury anyone," I said. "I'm here to make sure the country doesn't get buried because someone wanted a faster bonus." His jaw tightened. When he left, the door hissed shut behind him. By noon, I had flagged 3 major security failures and opened a private report folder labeled Level Omega. Each finding was more serious than the last. The first involved a direct access pipeline that bypassed throttling. The second, an obsolete filter, allowing quiet breaches through internal layers. The third, a suspicious deletion in sandbox logs that erased traces of testing. Any one of them could end the partnership. All 3 could trigger a federal suspension. I paused to stretch the faint vibration of the servers filling the silence. Milo returned with more data, his hands unsteady. "Is it really that bad?" he asked. "It's fixable," I said, "but not under the current leadership." He looked startled. "You mean Mason?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The hum of the equipment was answer enough. When the clock hit 1, I left the control floor for the conference level. The meeting room was all glass and polish, a long table set for 20. Bottled water lined the center like trophies. People were already gathering, executives, consultants, representatives from Apex. Gregory Stone arrived last, calm as always, followed by my father. He avoided looking at me as he took his seat at the head of the table. Mason entered a few minutes later, confidence freshly pressed. He began his presentation with a broad smile, slides flashing across the wall in bright colors, charts, projections of future painted in perfect numbers. I sat near the end, quiet, my laptop open. No one offered me coffee. No one asked if I needed anything. That was fine. Silence gives room for detail. When Mason finished, polite applause filled the space. Then Gregory looked across the table. "Agent Lane, your assessment." Every head turned. I stood, connected my laptop, and brought up a dark screen with the federal seal. Over the past 48 hours, I said my team and I conducted a full audit of Sentinel's back-end architecture. We found 3 Category Red vulnerabilities. Each alone would disqualify this project under federal law. Together, they signal a collapse in oversight. A hush fell over the room. Even the projector fan seemed to fade. I clicked the remote. Slide 1 appeared a breach time of 14 seconds. Slide 2, an inspection failure rate over 60%. Slide 3, a log inconsistency showing no forensic traceability. These flaws, I continued, could allow unauthorized access to defense systems through this interface. It wouldn't take a foreign actor. A skilled college hacker could compromise live feeds within minutes. Someone near the window swore under his breath. My father's hands gripped the edge of the table. "Agent Lane," he began, voice brittle. "Surely there's an explanation." "Ms. Lane is fine," I said. Then I clicked again. The next slide showed an access record, Mason's override on safety protocols timestamped before deployment. Mason stood abruptly. "That's taken out of context," he said. "I didn't disable safeguards. I expedited integration. You authorized an unstable system in a military network," I said quietly. "That's not innovation. That's negligence." Gregory looked grim. "I support a full freeze," he said at last. My father rose, his tone suddenly pleading. "Gregory, wait. We can discuss—" "There's nothing to discuss," Gregory replied. "If Harper says the system isn't ready, then it isn't." He turned toward me. "Your recommendation stands, Agent Lane. We'll await your final report." The meeting ended in the scrape of chairs and hushed movement. One by one, the executives filed out, leaving only the 3 of us, my father, Mason, and me. My father looked at me across the table, eyes searching for something he hadn't seen before. "You're this powerful now?" he asked quietly. I closed my laptop. "I didn't come back for power, Dad. I came back to protect what matters, even if that means protecting it from you." He didn't answer. Mason looked down, his confidence finally stripped away. I walked out before either could speak again. The corridor outside was lined with sunlight. Through the glass, I could see the city stretching far beyond the parking lot. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small under its weight. The work wasn't finished yet. The report still needed my signature. But the truth was already written. Tomorrow would bring the real reckoning, the moment where justice stopped being theoretical and started changing everything my family thought they owned. After the meeting, I didn't leave the building right away. The hall outside the conference room was lined with family photos from earlier decades. My father in front of prototype models, my mother before Diane, me and Mason as children in matching polos. The air felt too still, like everything inside those frames had stopped breathing years ago. I followed the old carpeted corridor up to the second floor past the same brass nameplate that used to make me proud. The study door was still there, dark oak, with a lion-shaped handle polished smooth by time. I pushed it open without knocking. My father was already inside, sitting behind the desk, a glass of scotch half finished. Diane was across from him, heels crossed at the ankle, a wine glass balanced in her hand. He looked up slowly. "Close the door, Harper." I did. For a moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the tick of the old grandfather clock by the window. "You embarrassed me," my father said, finally not raising his voice, just cutting it fine. "No," I said. "You embarrassed yourself. I just made sure the room could see it." Diane let out a small, bitter laugh. "You think this is justice? You humiliate your brother and call it duty." I looked at her. "You call it humiliation. I call it consequence." My father set down his glass. "You came back after 7 years to tear this family apart." I moved closer to the desk, my palms flat on the polished wood. "I came back to do my job. It's not my fault the truth landed in your company instead of someone else's." He stood straightening his jacket like armor. "You were the one who walked away, Harper. We didn't send you off." "You changed the locks," I reminded him. You told me I wasn't your daughter anymore because I wouldn't run your company. His eyes shifted something fragile behind them. You could have had everything he said quietly. I wanted something that was mine, I answered. Not borrowed approval dressed as success. Diane rose now, her voice sharp. You always needed to be the hero. You couldn't just be normal. Normal, I asked. You mean obedient? She moved closer, lowering her glass. You think you're better than us because some agency calls you special, because a man in a suit praised your work. I turned to her fully. You mean the encryption directive that protected this country from a data breach last spring? That project? Her face flushed, but she didn't reply. My father sat back down, staring at the rug. The silence stretched until he spoke again, quieter this time. I never hated your intelligence, he said. I hated the way you used it to leave us behind. That one sentence hit deeper than the rest. I kept my voice even. I didn't leave, Dad. I was pushed out every time I tried to be something that didn't fit your plan. He didn't deny it. He just sighed long and heavy. Mason wasn't ready, he murmured. I nodded. And now the whole country knows. Diane's mouth tightened. You really don't care what this does to him, do you? I looked toward the window where sunlight cut through the blinds. He'll survive. Maybe he'll even learn from it. My father rubbed his temples, suddenly looking older. What do you want from us, Harper? Nothing, I said. But if you care about this company at all, you'll replace Mason as project lead before the contract collapses. Not with me, I'm not staying, but with someone who earned it. He frowned. You'd have me demote my own son. I'd have you protect your legacy, I said. Right now it's hanging by a thread. His shoulders sank. And you, what do you want? I met his eyes one last time. I wanted a father who believed in me, not the version of me you built on paper. No one said anything after that. The air felt heavy like the end of a long storm with no clear sky yet in sight. I turned toward the door, my hand resting on the lion's mane handle. Behind me, Diane refilled her glass, the sound sharp in the silence. Outside, the afternoon light hit me full in the face. The parking lot was half empty, the flags near the gate snapping in the wind. I made it halfway to my car before I heard the footsteps. Mason's voice followed tight and strained. Running back to D.C. already, I turned. He was still in his dress shirt from the meeting, sleeves rolled past his elbows, no tie. He looked like he hadn't decided whether to be angry or ashamed. I'm not running anywhere, I said. I'm finished here. He leaned against the next car, over arms crossed. So that's it. You blow everything up and just walk away. No, I said quietly. I did my job. He shook his head, a half laugh under his breath. You really think I never tried? You think Dad handed me this on a silver platter? Every mistake I made he compared to you even after you left. I paused. That's not what it looked like. Of course not, he said. You were out saving the world. I was in here trying to live up to a ghost. I leaned back against my car door, the wind cutting between us. Then why didn't you say something? Because if I admitted I wasn't ready, he'd think I was weak, Mason said. And if I said you were better, he'd cut me out, so I kept trying. And you almost cost the company a federal contract. He winced. I didn't see it getting that bad. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed. I thought if I just got through this one deal, he'd finally stop talking about you. The bitterness in his voice cracked something old and familiar inside me. You were never supposed to compete with me, I said quietly. We weren't supposed to be pitted against each other. He looked up then, meeting my eyes fully for the first time in years. You loved this place too, didn't you? I did, I said, before they made me choose between it and myself. We stood there a long moment, the sound of engines from the highway drifting across the lot. Then he asked, Are you going to report me for the override? It's already in the report, I said, but I didn't recommend a criminal referral, just replacement and oversight. He exhaled slowly. You're not here to destroy me. No, I said, but I won't protect your shortcuts either. He nodded, eyes on this pavement. Then maybe it's time I stopped taking them. I opened my car door, one hand on the frame. Don't waste the second chance, Mason. You won't get another. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't raise his voice or ask for forgiveness. He just watched as I pulled out of the lot, the wind catching the edge of his shirt, like it was trying to carry away what was left of our family pride. The drive back toward the city was quiet. I didn't replay the meeting or the arguments. I only thought about how close I'd come to being one of them, comfortable, powerful, silent. The skyline came into view, the glass towers reflecting the last streaks of daylight. By the time I reached the apartment, I felt the weight of it all settle like dust on my shoulders. I hung my blazer over the chair and set my badge on the table. The phone vibrated once. A new message from Gregory Stone Private, meeting 5 p.m., M Street office, confidential. The next phase was already waiting. I poured a glass of water and looked out at the city lights. They flickered softly, steady and unbothered. Tomorrow the work would continue, different rooms, same duty. But tonight the silence was mine, and for the first time it didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. Gregory Stone's office overlooked the Potomac, all glass and muted light. By the time I arrived, the sky was shifting into the warm color of evening streaked with gold over the water. He was seated behind a desk of dark walnut, no papers, just a pot of tea between us. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I figured a quiet talk might do us both some good." He poured 2 cups without asking, steam curling between us. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, a sign. This was not business as usual. "You said confidential," I replied. "That's not a word I take lightly." He smiled at that, the kind of smile that came from knowing exactly who he was speaking to. "Always, but especially with you," he said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air carried that same mix of formality and calm that filled secure briefings, a respect built on things unsaid. "Do you remember your first publication?" he asked after a while. "The one on decentralized response firewalls?" I nodded. "I wrote it before I was cleared," I said. "Barely out of grad school. I read it twice," he said. "Because it wasn't written to impress anyone. It was written to protect." He sipped his tea and leaned back. "Even then it was clear what kind of person you'd become. You weren't after recognition, Harper. You were after results." I looked at him, unsure where this was going. "Your father is a strategist," he said. "Your brother is ambitious. But you," he paused, his voice lower. "Now you're a guardian. You don't make noise for attention. You make change because it's necessary." The words landed heavier than I expected. He set his cup down and went on. "That's why I requested you for this audit. When I saw lane dynamics on the contract list, I knew it would be a conflict. But I also knew we needed someone who wouldn't flinch, who didn't owe anyone in that building a single favor. I hadn't known he'd asked for me specifically. The weight of that settled between us in the silence that followed. "You were right," I said quietly. "It was a conflict." He nodded. "And you handled it the only way it could be handled, clean, transparent, decisive. There will be noise for a while. Your father will try to save face, Mason will have to adjust, and people at Apex will scramble to recalibrate the timeline. But that's all temporary. What you did today will hold." I let the quiet stretch for a long moment. The city lights were starting to flicker to life beyond the windows, reflections glinting off the water like scattered glass. "So what happens now?" I asked. "You file your final report," he said. "Someone else will oversee implementation. Mason will either learn or fall apart trying. And your father—" He paused. "He'll have to decide what matters more, control or survival." I set my tea down gently. "And me?" He smiled, almost faintly. "You keep doing what you do best. You stay steady when others panic." When I stood to leave, he rose as well, offering his hand. "You didn't come back for revenge," he said. "That's why it worked." Outside, the air had cooled. The streets were quiet, except for the hum of traffic on M Street and the faint sound of water moving below the bridge. I walked slowly back to my car, the weight in my chest lighter than it had been in years. The truth wasn't just that I'd survived the confrontation. It was that I had done it without becoming what I'd fought against. The drive home passed in silence. My small apartment looked the same when I opened the door, worn blue couch shelves lined with books, a narrow balcony overlooking Georgetown rooftops. I hung my jacket over the chair and let the door close softly behind me. For once, I didn't rush to check emails or messages. The quiet was its own kind of relief. It had been 4 days since the audit 3, since I submitted the report 2, since I deleted the last voicemail from my father, a call that started like an apology and ended in static. I hadn't decided whether I believed any part of it yet. That night I made dinner for one pasta with basil and olive oil, a glass of wine, music low from the speaker near the window. Halfway through the meal, a knock came at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, a young woman stood there no more than 22, her dark hair pulled into a braid, a badge on a lanyard around her neck. She held a manila folder, like it was something precious. "Agent Lane?" she asked. "Technically," I said, "but just Harper here." She smiled nervously. "I'm with the DC Cyber Fellowship program. I was told to deliver this to you personally." I took the folder, my name printed neatly across the top. Inside was a letter embossed with the federal seal. It read, "We would be honored if you would serve as a lead mentor and program designer for our National Youth Encryption Initiative." I looked up. She was watching me carefully, waiting for my reaction. "Is it not the right time?" she asked, her voice soft. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. She looked relieved, then added shyly, "I read your Geneva paper last year. It's why I joined the program. You made people like me believe we could belong in this field." For a moment, I saw myself in her, the same uncertainty, the same determination, hidden under layers of composure. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. "You shouldn't be walking around the city carrying classified mail alone. At least have some tea." She laughed quietly and followed me inside. We talked for almost an hour about code, about fear, about what it meant to do the right thing, even when no one thanked you for it. When she left, the room felt full in a way it hadn't in a long time. I sat by the window again, the city lights stretching out before me. No applause, no headlines, no celebrations, just the quiet certainty that something had shifted, not just in them, but in me. I thought about Mason, whether he was finding his footing or hiding behind excuses. I thought about my father, maybe realizing that love and control were never the same thing. And I thought about Gregory's words, "You're a guardian." On the side table was an old journal, its pages half-filled from years ago. I opened it to a clean page and wrote a single sentence. I didn't come back to reclaim a house. I came back to reclaim myself. I set the pen down and closed the book. Tomorrow would bring new faces, new work, new reasons to keep building what mattered. But tonight, I let the stillness be enough, the kind that comes after a storm, when the air finally feels safe to breathe again. And for the first time since I'd left that house, I didn't feel like someone's daughter trying to prove her worth. I felt whole exactly as I was. The next morning came softly, the way mornings do after something final has already been said. The city outside my window was pale and quiet, still shaking off the night. My phone sat on the table beside the mug I hadn't finished the evening before. I hadn't checked it since I sent my report. For once, I didn't need to. A message blinked across the screen, an internal memo from the agency confirming the Sentinel contract freeze and a list of next steps. It was brief, factual, nothing emotional. But seeing it in print carried a weight of closure that words from my family never had. I scrolled to the end, saw my name under lead authorization, and closed the message. I had a morning meeting scheduled with the DC Fellowship team, the same program that had invited me to mentor. The office was a few blocks from the federal building, a clean space with glass walls and desks lined with dual monitors. Lena Ortiz was already waiting when I arrived, her hair pulled into a braid again, a small coffee in her hand. "You made it," she said, her voice bright. "I said I would. I told her setting my bag down." She smiled nervously. "We set up the briefing room. They're excited to meet you." Inside, a handful of young analysts sat in a semicircle of chairs, fresh faces full of that mix of eagerness and unease that comes with new responsibility. I recognized it immediately. I'd once been one of them. The director, a soft-spoken man named Elliot Marks, introduced me. He'd built the fellowship from scratch, pairing mentors from the intelligence community with students working on encryption and counter-intrusion projects. "Agent Lane," he said with a polite nod, "your work has come up in this room more times than I can count." Titles always made me uneasy, so I shook my head. "Harper is fine," I said. "I'm not here to lecture. I'm here to listen and to help where I can." That broke the stiffness in the air. For the next hour, we talked about field protocols, algorithm safety, and what it meant to work behind the scenes without recognition. One of the students asked, "What keeps you going when people don't see the work you do?" I paused before answering. "The results," I said. "The days when nothing goes wrong, that's when you know you did your job right." Lena scribbled notes beside me like she was afraid to miss a word. When the session ended, she lingered behind while the others packed up. "I know this probably sounds silly," she said, "but seeing you here, it makes everything feel possible. My parents still think I should have gone into accounting." I smiled. "Then make sure you're good enough they stop asking." She laughed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Will you come back next week?" "If the schedule allows," I said. "Keep me updated on your projects." As I left, the sound of their conversations trailed behind me, low, excited, full of promise. It felt lighter than any meeting I'd been in for years. Outside, the sky had turned bright sunlight, catching on the rooftops of the old brick buildings. I stopped for a coffee and checked the time. The rest of the day was free. That was a rare thing for me. My father's house wasn't far, a thought that surfaced before I could stop it. I'd ignored 3 calls from him since the audit. Part of me wanted to keep it that way, but another part, quieter and more tired than angry, needed to see how far things had really fallen. When I pulled into the Lane estate, the front gates were open. That never happened. The yard looked unchanged, the hedges perfect, the driveway clean enough to reflect the afternoon sun. Inside the house smelled faintly of scotch and old wood polish. Thomas was in the study, the same spot as before. He didn't stand when I walked in. Diane wasn't there this time. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." "I didn't expect to come," I said. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "You've made quite the impression. Gregory called me this morning, said you handled yourself well." I sat but didn't respond. He exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the glass in his hand. "You were right about Mason," he said. "He wasn't ready." "That's not news," I replied. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." He rubbed the edge of his temple. "I thought I could build something lasting. Maybe I pushed too hard." "You did what you always do," I said. "You built something, then expected everyone else to fit inside it." He didn't argue. "He's staying on in a smaller role," he said finally, "under review until the board decides next quarter." "That's fair," I said. "I suppose it is," he murmured. "And you'll move on to the next assignment, I imagine." "I already have." He gave a faint nod, the kind that accepts defeat without admitting it. "You've become someone I don't recognize, Harper." I stood. "Maybe that's because you never really looked." His voice stopped me before I reached the door. "I read your report," he said. "It was clear, professional, not personal." "It wasn't meant to be personal," I said. He nodded again, looking past me toward the window. It still was. Outside, the air felt fresher. I wasn't angry anymore, just empty in a way that felt clean, like something old had finally burned out. That evening, I sat on the balcony with my laptop reviewing proposals from the fellowship program. A notification appeared, an internal alert from the agency. It was an update: Sentinel integration approved for restructuring. Federal oversight assigned to Apex under temporary leadership. Lane Dynamics to remain as subcontractor under compliance review. I read it twice, then closed the screen. The system would survive. The company would too, though not the way my father intended. As the city lights flickered on below, my phone buzzed again. A text from Mason: "Audit done. Reassigned. Starting from scratch. Thanks for not burying me." I typed back, "Make it count this time." Then I set the phone aside and watched the night take hold. The following morning, a package arrived at my door, a small wooden box with no sender listed. Inside was a folded note in my father's handwriting: "For the times I didn't listen." Beneath it lay an old pocket watch, its back engraved with my initials. I remembered it from childhood. He used to keep it in his coat during long work trips. It still ticked faintly. I set it on the shelf beside the framed photo of my mother. The rhythm of its ticking filled the room like a quiet heartbeat. Some things I realized didn't have to be resolved to be understood. I went back to my desk, opened a blank document, and began outlining the first mentorship module for the fellowship. The header read, "Integrity in Practice." The cursor blinked at the end of the title, steady and sure, like a pulse that refused to stop. I smiled, saved the file, and looked out the window where the first light of morning touched the rooftops. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be about repairing what was lost. It would be about building what could last. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. 2 weeks passed quietly, the kind of calm that follows a storm that has nowhere left to go. My days settled into a rhythm: morning coffee, long hours at the agency evenings, mentoring with the fellowship team. The noise around the Sentinel audit faded fast. Within the department, the headlines had already shifted to the next contract, the next data breach, the next story that wasn't mine. But silence has its own echo. Every so often, I'd open my inbox and see an unread message from my father. They were short: "Call me," or "Need to discuss Mason's placement." I never answered. The old cycle of control was trying to restart, just quieter this time. I knew better than to step into it again. At the fellowship center, Lena was thriving. She'd moved from assistant to full analyst, designing an intrusion detection model that was cleaner than most senior prototypes I'd seen. When I stopped by one afternoon, she grinned and said, "You're going to like this." Her new dashboard flashed across the screen in real time, every line of code deliberate and neat. "Looks solid," I said. "How long did it take you?" 4 nights, she admitted, laughing. "I didn't sleep much." "Good. That's when the best work gets built." She hesitated, then added, "I got an interview at Apex next month." Gregory Stone's assistant reached out personally. I smiled, remembering the quiet conviction in his office weeks ago. "You'll do fine," I told her. "He values integrity more than perfection." The look on her face reminded me why I'd agreed to join the fellowship in the first place. There was something grounding about seeing the next generation step into the space I'd once stood, uncertain, hungry, and still unscarred by politics. It felt like leaving a light on in a hallway I'd spent years walking in the dark. That evening, I drove home with the windows down, the city lights running smooth across the windshield. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Another message, this one from Mason. "Meeting tomorrow. Need your advice. Dad won't say it, but he's lost." I stared at it at a red light. For a long moment, I considered ignoring it the way I'd ignored every other attempt. But there was something different in his wording this time. Lost. Not angry, not defensive. Just lost. By morning, I found myself pulling into the Lane Dynamics parking lot again. The guard at the gate recognized me and nodded. "Good to see you, Agent Lane," he said. I parked in the visitor section, the same spot I'd used the day of the audit. The air carried that same faint scent of rain and concrete. Mason met me in the lobby. He looked tired but steadier than before, a man starting to stand on his own weight. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I didn't think you'd say yes." "I almost didn't," I admitted. He led me upstairs to the project floor. Gone were the endless banners and self-congratulatory posters that once lined the hall. The room felt stripped down real. Milo was there too, sorting through hardware by the central table. When he saw me, he straightened. "Agent Lane," he said quickly. "Milo!" I greeted, smiling. "Still running containment." "Yes, ma'am, but Mason's taking my job soon." He shot Mason a small grin. Mason just shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "I've got a lot to fix first." He motioned me toward a workstation where a series of clean-coded tests flickered across the screen. "I called because I need you to look at this," he said. "It's the new Sentinel rebuild. I used your report as a blueprint." I studied the layout. The vulnerabilities were gone, replaced by layered defenses that were elegant in their simplicity. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was right. "You wrote this?" I asked. He nodded. "I wanted to prove I could." "You just did," I said. He exhaled and leaned back. "I wish I'd listened sooner." I looked at him, the younger version of everything I'd once fought: privilege assumption, easy access. But the arrogance was gone now, replaced with something quieter. "Listening's the first real step toward leading," I said. He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Dad doesn't see it that way." "What does he see?" "A failure with his last name," he said. "He's been different since the freeze, distant, like he's still trying to understand what happened." He built a world where no one was allowed to tell him no, I said. Now he's hearing it everywhere. Mason nodded slowly. "He asked about you, you know. Keeps saying you should have been the one to take over." I met his eyes. "That was never the plan. and it never should be. He looked down at his hands. I'm trying to rebuild trust here. It's harder than I thought. Trust doesn't come back fast, I said. It grows the way code does, line by line, after every mistake. For a long while we said nothing. The hum of the servers filled the silence. Then Mason said, "Thanks for not ending us when you could have." "You ended the version that needed to be ended," I said. That's what mattered. By the time I left the building, the afternoon had turned gray. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove out toward the edge of Arlington to a quiet street that overlooked the river. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and water. My father's house wasn't far, but I didn't stop there. I parked by the overlook instead, rolled down the window, and let the sound of the river fill the car. My phone vibrated once. A new message from Gregory Sentinel, fully reinstated. Compliance passed. Mason's name included in the final credit list. I read it twice before replying, "Good. That's where it belongs." Back at home, a package waited at my door. Plain brown paper, no return label. Inside was a short note written in the steady handwriting I recognized instantly. I saw the report. "You did what I couldn't. Proud doesn't begin to cover it." No signature, but none was needed. Beneath the note was something small wrapped in cloth, a gold company pin, the kind given only to founding board members. I turned it over in my hand, the engraved initials faint but still legible. He had resigned. I set the pin beside the old pocket watch on the shelf. For years, both had symbolized obligation. Now they felt more like closure. That night, I wrote a short message to Mason. He finally saw it, even if he'll never say it out loud. A minute later, he replied, "That's enough." It was. The next morning, the air smelled of rain again, and sunlight broke gently across the rooftops. I poured coffee, opened my laptop, and found a new email from Elliot Marks. "Harper, your mentorship proposal was approved. You'll oversee the national program starting this fall." I read it once, closed the laptop, and looked out the window at the city waking below. The world had gone on. The noise had quieted. For the first time in years, I felt free of the weight of proving myself to anyone. Somewhere down in that quiet hum of morning traffic, I knew a different kind of story was starting, one that didn't need an audience-only purpose. And this time I was ready to live it. Tomorrow I'd call Gregory to confirm the mentorship partnership. Then I'd call Lena to tell her she got the job. But for now, I sat with the calm, listening to the steady rhythm of the clock and the rain against the glass. Two sounds that finally felt like peace finding its way home. Autumn came early that year. The mornings turned crisp, the air along the Potomac carrying a quiet that felt cleaner than anything I'd known in years. The Sentinel project had stabilized lane dynamics, was operating under new oversight, and the news cycle had finally moved on. For the first time, my name wasn't tied to a headline or a controversy. It just existed, unspoken, ordinary. That felt right. Most evenings, I stayed late at the fellowship offices reviewing code or helping the younger analysts refine their work. Lena often stayed with me, her coffee growing cold as she debugged line after line of data. Some nights we'd step out onto the balcony and watch the city lights shimmer over the river. "You think it ever really ends?" she asked once, her voice soft. "The fight between what's right and what's easy?" I smiled, watching headlights cross the bridge below. "No," I said. "It just changes shape. That's why people like us keep showing up." She nodded slowly, like she was trying to memorize the thought. Moments like that reminded me of what I'd once lost, chasing the wrong kind of approval, the sense of purpose that didn't depend on anyone else's permission. A week later, I drove out to Arlington again. The house looked smaller than I remembered. My father was outside pruning the hedges near the gate. He straightened when he saw my car, eyes narrowing against the light. We hadn't spoken since his letter. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he set the clippers down and said quietly, "You found your way back." "Maybe just passing through," I said. He nodded toward the porch. Coffee. Inside the house felt different. The trophies, the framed contracts, the polished photos, they were still there, but the space around them seemed emptier, less certain. Diane wasn't home. It was just the two of us, and the quiet hum of the old clock on the wall. He poured 2 cups, sat across from me, and studied his hands. "Mason told me what you said to him," he began, "about earning trust line by line. I've been thinking about that. I didn't interrupt. He looked up. I built this company to protect people. Somewhere along the way, I started protecting my pride instead. I didn't see how much it cost. That's why I had to walk away, I said. He nodded once, a slow motion heavy with understanding. I know. And I was wrong to make you choose between family and purpose. You shouldn't have had to. The apology landed gently like something long overdue, but still fragile. For a moment, all I could hear was the ticking of that same old pocket watch he'd given me. It's different now, I said finally. You don't have to say everything. Just do better. He gave a faint smile. Working on it. We talked for a while about Mason, about the rebuild, about what came next. It wasn't emotional or grand. It was just two people learning how to speak again without keeping score. When I left, he followed me to the door. Harper, he said as I stepped onto the porch, you did the right thing. I see that now. I looked back at him, the man who'd once defined every part of who I was supposed to be. So did you, I said. You finally let go. On the drive home, the sun dipped behind the trees, streaking the road in gold. The watch in my pocket ticked softly, steady and alive. That sound had once reminded me of obligation. Now it felt like rhythm proof that time could move forward without carrying the past's weight. A few days later, the fellowship hosted its fall showcase. The atrium was packed with students, mentors, and agency partners. Gregory arrived midway through his usual calm, filling the room without effort. You've built something remarkable, he said, gesturing to the rows of young analysts presenting their projects. You've given them a reason to believe this work matters. It always did, I said. They just needed someone to say it out loud. He smiled a quiet approval in his eyes. Then keep saying it. When it was Lena's turn to present, I stood in the back as she demonstrated her intrusion resistance model, precise, confident, and completely her own. She didn't need anyone to speak for her anymore. Watching her, I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped carrying my family's mistakes. I was building something new, one life at a time. That night, back in my apartment, I opened the window to the cool air and the hum of traffic below. On the shelf, the pocket watch and gold company pin caught the light side by side. They no longer felt like trophies of pain or proof of survival. They were reminders of what had been learned and what had finally been laid to rest. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who left home with nothing but defiance and a car full of books, and I wished I could tell her it all turns out okay. That sometimes justice doesn't come as punishment, but as peace. That walking away doesn't mean losing. It means choosing where your story goes next. And that's what I'd done. Before I turned out the lights, I drafted a message for the fellowship newsletter. It was short, just a few lines under the title, Integrity in Practice. Do the work quietly, stand your ground kindly, and remember the measure of justice isn't who sees it, but who's free because of it. I hit send and closed the laptop. The city outside pulsed with life horns, footsteps, and the soft rhythm of everything still moving. Before I go, I want to leave you with this. We can't rewrite the families we come from, but we can choose the legacy we leave behind. And sometimes the quiet kind of justice, the kind that heals instead of hurts, is the most powerful kind of all. If you've ever fought to reclaim your worth or found the courage to start again, share your story below. Someone out there might need to hear that it's possible. And if you haven't yet, don't worry. Your peace will find you just like mine did.